Hello and welcome to a very windy Galveston, Texas, where today we'll be discussing one of the poorest build quality Mercedes ever built. In fact, the car in question was actually built in the US of A in the state of Alabama, and this is, of course, the W163 ML, also known as the Alabama trash can for some reason, but we'll get into that more later. Let's get into the video. Huh, what's that over there?
The year is 1992, and Mercedes-Benz begins the process of developing an all-new product for the lineup. This is the ML, and to BMW's dismay, also known as the M Class. Rumors suggested that this SUV was destined to replace the beloved G-Wagon. While the Geländewagen was purpose-built for the military and later adapted for civilian usage, the ML was a design for the general public from the very beginning. The 1996 AAV Concept previewed what was to come for the future of the ML, although that concept interior just screams late 90s, doesn't it? The W163 had a ladder frame much like its G-Wagon counterpart, and was engineered to be off-road capable with a 2-speed Borg-Warner transfer case. The ML was shifted toward passenger comfort compared to the G-Wagon, and was also designed with independent suspension along with a more upscale interior for the time, at least compared to the G-Wagon of the same era, for an overall more refined experience, though using the word refined might be a bit of a stretch. The ML did not have any locking differentials and instead utilized a 4-wheel ETS system which simulated the effect of locking differentials by breaking individual wheels to modulate torque output. Oh yeah, it also featured in the 1997 Jurassic Park film as a part of a promotion. I won't get into too much detail about the movie cars, as that's a whole topic for itself, but there were 3 ML320s featured in the film, highly modified by the production team, and they seem to have developed somewhat of a cult following, as you'll see lots of modified W163 MLs inspired by the Jurassic Park film, whether it's the color scheme or something else. Now I'll show you this scene because Eddie is driving his highly modified ML320 trying to pull out some other people from this RV that are falling off a cliff, and he's pulling pretty frantically, as you can see here with the ML. And what's funny about this scene, now it's pretty terrifying actually, but what's funny to me at least, is how they show Eddie press the low range button and shift into reverse. Not a single person back in 1997 watching this in the theaters would have any idea what that button did in that very quick 2-second clip. Yet here I am talking about it almost 30 years later. Oh yeah, and this also happens. Anyways, let's get back on track, shall we? The W163 was the first vehicle produced in Mercedes' MBUSI factory in Vance, Alabama in February of 1997. It made sense given that the US was expected to be the strongest market for this new SUV. In the US, you could have gasoline V6s and V8s with a range-topping ML55 AMG available later production, but in the rest of the world, you could get a 4-cylinder gasoline engine, a turbo 5-cylinder diesel, which you could opt with a manual, or even a turbocharged V8 in the ML400 CDI. Most of Europe and parts of Asia received examples built in Austria at the Magna Steyr facility, which just so happens to be where the G-Wagon is produced to this day. Build quality was certainly a sore point for the W163, especially the very early examples. Cheap, scratchy plastics, inconsistent panel gaps, and exposed hardware were among the biggest complaints of the first examples. Jeremy Clarkson was quick to point this out in a classic Top Gear review back in the day.
Look at the gap here! There are people living down there. Closed screw heads, rough edges, and poor panel fit.
On the downside, it doesn't appear to be as well made as a normal Mercedes. It's cramped, noisy, and expensive.
All of these negative factors unfortunately led to the Alabama trash can nickname. Even the Austrian-built examples fell victim to poor quality interior materials, at least when compared to other Mercedes models at the time. That being said, comparing build quality to the likes of the W140 S-Class, W210 E-Class, and R129 SL is no easy task. A luxury SUV meant to bridge the gap between more hardcore off-roaders and more normal cars required many trade-offs. This ML was brought to market in the infancy of the luxury crossover segment, when manufacturers were still trying to figure out what consumers desired the most. Many of the ML's quirks and build quality concerns were addressed in the 2002 facelift, though there was still room for improvement given the SUV's near $40,000 base price, which is close to an incredible $70,000 in 2024. By the time these improvements were made, the competition had already caught up and even surpassed the W163 ML in terms of both comfort and technology, though that didn't seem to slow down sales. The first generations of the Lexus RX and the BMW X5 arrived on the market not long after the 163's release, both of which were unibody constructions that prioritized occupant comfort and luxury features. The X5, codenamed E53 at its first generation, was essentially a lifted E39 5 Series, which, in my completely unbiased opinion, is one of the best chassis BMWs has ever produced. The Lexus RX was honest in that it was not intended for any serious off-roading. Lexus knew the vast majority of consumers in this segment would not be taking their vehicles off-roading, and as a result did not need to make as many compromises. After all, they did have the Lexus LX. I should mention the first RX does have a suspiciously similar C-pillar to the ML. While the W163 was certainly capable, much like the $300,000 G63s you see in Beverly Hills parked on Rodeo Drive, these vehicles rarely left the pavement. It seems Mercedes picked up on this as they completely switched to unibody design for the W164 ML. In fact, every single Mercedes SUV that followed the 163 has been a unibody aside from the G-Wagon, of course. The ML was designed in collaboration between the Mercedes German offices and design colleges out of Irvine, California, which is practically down the street from where I grew up. The result is, well, weirdness. I mean, just look at the thing. The 163 has an oddly round, bubbly design, which wasn't very Mercedes per se, especially when compared to the rest of the boxy lineup at the time. In promotional videos, Mercedes comically tries to convince you that the 163 has lots of Mercedes design elements. Take a look.
A rugged-looking front announces M-Class off-road abilities. The sporty grille traces its design roots to the famous 300 SL in the 50s. The headlamps are unique, but remind you of the S-Class Coupe and the SLK.
The 163 ML and 168 A-Class, which both came to market in 1997, can be seen as two of the strangest design choices to come out of a brand known for relatively restrained yet progressive stylistic choices. Mercedes engineers had a goal of achieving a drag coefficient of under 0.4 for efficiency, which they did at 0.39. This was impressive for the time, considering the G-Wagon was over 0.5. Mind you, that is literally a fridge on wheels. Take a look at this curved yet intentional sculpted C-pillar. This could have easily been a rectangular window, but it was designed with these black D-pillars to make the rear glass look almost like one piece. Something I find quite satisfying is that every W163 successor that followed has the exact same C-pillar design. Its weirdly shaped late 90s, 2000s headlights and blobby bumper certainly haven't aged as gracefully as the coherent lines of the E53 X5. If you were to compare the current X5 to the original, you would see it's naturally evolved for the last 25 or so years. There are specific design cues that have remained intact despite everything else going on at BMW at the moment. If you compare a brand new GLE to the original ML, you see that C-pillar, but that's about it. I do like the look of the AMG or Sport Package 163s with their better looking bumpers and chunky fender flares. The rear of the SUV was criticized harshly for looking more like a confused station wagon than anything else. A good fix for this? Well, that would be the extremely rare, near impossible to find in the US OEM rear spare wheel carrier. Isn't that just fantastic? In the US, it was only offered for a short time until the useless third row seating became available, as apparently the rear tire carrier used with the third row wasn't safe enough in the event of a rear-end collision for MBUSA standards. Moving on to the interior, we have perhaps the more bland part of the ML. Personally, I don't mind it in the current day, where less features just means less things to break. But even back in 1997, this was a bit behind other Mercedes models. For perspective, the trip computer that displayed the MPG and range was optional well into the 2000s. At the end of its life cycle in 2005, build quality had substantially improved, though features were lacking compared to the competition. The gauge cluster is simple in a very pleasant way, and is the last time Mercedes used this particular style of cluster in this font and shape. The absolute brick of a steering wheel is unique to the ML, which isn't exactly a good thing. No media controls or anything on here, which was especially embarrassing by the time 2005 came around. I mean, even a Honda Civic from 05 had steering wheel controls. Considering the E53X5 had all of this standard for most of the very beginning of its life cycle in 1999, the ML was falling behind quickly from a technological perspective. What the ML lacked a technology it made up for in practicality. The spacious interior did not hide its motives to quickly captivate the American market, as it had actual cup holders. These things can hold a large blizzard from Dairy Queen, no problem. The W164 ML second generation was a massive step forward in the interior department, but of course this came with many new problems to deal with over time. Ask me how I know. The rear seats of the 163 do fold down, but it can be a little bit cumbersome with the weird latches and movements, and I do know this changed partway through the 163 lifecycle. As mentioned earlier, the 163 was offered with a completely useless third row midway through its lifecycle, an obvious afterthought that can only fit legless humans, and it was folded away in the least elegant way possible. Safe to say that was not a common option for good reason. It's got the rear seats, which is a pretty rare option actually, but they're rare because, well, a kid can barely fit back there, and then you have no luggage capacity either, so. Despite the quality gripes of the ML interior, I can say with confidence that this facelift 163 ML has less interior creaks and rattles than many new cars on the market today. The W163 ML is largely forgotten as they have simply depreciated their way into junkyards to be crushed at some point down the line, which is kind of surprising for a vehicle with such a massive impact on the auto industry. These MLs have essentially no residual value, and a clean example is hard to come by. It seems that most of these 163s have gone on to their 5th or 6th owner before a fender bender totals it out. Think of how this segment has grown and divided into more segments with models like the BMW X5, the Audi Q7, Mercedes GLK, GLC, BMW X3, Audi Q5, Volkswagen Touareg, Porsche Cayenne, Porsche Macan, Bentley Bentayga, Aston Martin DBX, Lamborghini Urus, Rolls-Royce Cullinan, you get the point. While the concept of the luxury SUV was not entirely new, one could argue that the ML made it a trend for European manufacturers. After all, Mercedes did manage to beat their German competition to market in what seemed like an intense battle over US customers. And today, for better or worse, we can see how this has snowballed into having a production Ferrari SUV with a naturally aspirated V12. That may sound like a stretch, and it is, but if you really think about it, there is some truth to it. The lower price point of the W163, along with its early entry to market, gave it a sales boost over the competition, specifically the E53X5. The ML was able to overcome its harsh criticisms by being more broadly appealing and being overall well targeted to the US market. While journalists and enthusiasts alike were quick to make scathing comments about the ML's build quality, it still sold 1.1 million units globally in its 9-year model run. The E53X5, considered by many to be the better vehicle, sold 800,000 units globally in its 8 model year run. If we quickly crunch some numbers, that means the ML on average outsold the X5 over 20,000 units every year. It does go to show that maybe Mercedes, with their colossal research and development budget, was correct in designing the 163 to the specific price point they sought after. In reality, my belief is that the X5 and the ML of this era were completely different vehicles. One was an off-road truck with relatively decent on-road manners, while the other was a luxury performance crossover with off-road capabilities as well. Comparing the W163 to the E53 is sort of like an apples to oranges comparison, because, you know, they're both fruit. Get it? Because, you know, fruits, apples, or never mind. You know what? Just forget I said that. It sounded better in my head. Since I began making this video, I've owned not one, but 2 different W163 MLs, and I'll talk more about why I bought them in a future video, so definitely stay tuned for that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video about the W163 ML, a vehicle that no one really cares about. If you did enjoy it, then leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next video.